The morning mist clung to the narrow valleys of the Japanese archipelago, covering the rice fields and coastal cliffs with a pale veil that swayed under the breath of the ocean. In this land, where mountains rested their heavy shadows upon restless shores, water shaped not only the life of peasants and fishermen, but also the destiny of warriors whose path required absolute unity with the elements. For the samurai, born and raised in a country where every road eventually led to a river, a bay, or to the open sea, water was never just an obstacle, it was a force that demanded respect, discipline, and readiness. The rains that fell with the persistence of fate, turning roads into streams and plains into mirror-like lakes, reminded each warrior that a battle could begin on dry land but end in swirling currents or in the cold embrace of deep waters. He observed the land around him as if it were a training ground drawn by nature itself, rivers twisting like serpents between villages, narrow straits acting as natural barriers for clans, and stormy shores where the waves never ceased their heavy march. In such a world, a samurai could not allow himself to fight only on solid earth, for war did not respect boundaries of terrain or seasons. Armies clashed on river crossings, ambushed each other among the reeds of coastal marshes, and charged forward even when storms washed away the paths beneath their feet. A warrior knew that his armor, heavy with iron plates, could turn into both shield and curse once water reached his waist. Yet he stepped into it without hesitation, understanding that survival lay not in strength alone, but in the mastery of movement within this living, shifting element. Battles of the Sengoku era offered countless reminders of how easily land and water merged into one arena of war. Foot soldiers sank knee-deep into mud, while archers tried to keep their bows dry beneath the unending rain. Mounted warriors crossed rivers that suddenly rose after night storms, forcing them to lift their spears above their heads just to keep weapons usable. In such moments it became clear that the fight was not only against an armed foe, but against water itself, cold, persistent, unpredictable. The samurai learned to listen to the whisper of currents, to feel how the weight of wet armor altered his center of gravity, and to recognize that hesitation meant defeat. What mattered was the ability to move, even when soaked, blinded by spray or pulled by unseen undertows. Stories traveled from province to province about warriors who crossed flooded plains at night, or who continued fighting waist-deep in river water, their armor dragging at their limbs, but their determination refusing to yield. In these accounts, water became not a barrier, but a silent witness, reflecting the will of the one who dared to challenge it. The sea had taken many warriors, but it had also shaped those who returned from its depths, stronger, calmer, and more aware of the fragile line between life and loss. This understanding gave rise to the belief that a samurai must be ready to fight on every surface the world offered, sand, rock, mud, or wave, because his path did not end where the land ended. Thus, the art of swimming in armor emerged not as a skill of leisure, but as a necessity demanded by the harsh reality of an island nation in constant tension between clans, storms, and shifting tides. It became one of the many silent arts that shaped the warrior spirit, forged not only through sword practice and horse riding, but through immersion in the very waters that define Japan's borders. And as time revealed, the mastery of this element would soon become one of the defining features of the samurai ethos, a bond between man, steel, and the ever-restless sea, a bond tested most fiercely in the coming centuries, when Japan would face threats far beyond its familiar shores.
Across the vast stretches of the Japanese archipelago, where every province leaned toward the sea as if listening to its eternal murmurs, the warriors of old gradually discovered that mastery over water was not only a matter of individual survival, but a strategic necessity for the fate of the entire nation. The 13th century brought this truth forward with unprecedented clarity, when dark sails appeared on the horizon and the Mongol envoys carried a message that promised nothing but ruin. From that moment, the sea ceased to be merely a border. It became a battlefield, and Japan began to shape its own military fleets with the urgency of a people aware that the waves could deliver either salvation or destruction. In the coastal domains, shipbuilders worked tirelessly beneath wooden roofs blackened by smoke. carving vessels that combined the speed of fishing boats with the strength demanded by war. The fast kobaya, light and narrow, sliced through coastal waters with the agility of a hawk diving for its prey. These vessels carried scouts, messengers, and warriors who moved swiftly, vanishing into fog or reappearing behind enemy lines as if born from the sea itself. Alongside them, the maneuverable attack boats, controlled by rowers trained to steer even in the chaos of storms, played a crucial role. Every man on board wielded more than a paddle. Each rower was a warrior with a blade, and battles at sea often turned into close combat where water splashed red and the sound of steel echoed over the waves. Yet the true symbols of early Japanese naval strength were the massive sekibune, heavy warships capable of carrying hundreds of fighters. Their thick wooden walls shielded archers positioned above the deck, and their great hulls pressed forward with quiet menace through the rolling swell. When these ships advanced in formation, the sea itself seemed to shift beneath their weight, as though acknowledging the presence of floating fortresses ready to unleash destruction. Commanders who stood upon their high decks understood that sea warfare demanded a new perspective. Battles were movements of the tide, shifting lines of advance and retreat, every gust of wind influencing strategy as deeply as any sword stroke. During those tumultuous decades, the samurai gradually learned to blend their land-born fighting spirit with the unpredictable mood of the sea. Rain often fell in sheets so dense that the horizon disappeared into a gray void, turning battles into blind struggles driven only by instinct and discipline. Arrows flew in dark arcs, their feathers soaked but still deadly, while rowers strained against currents that threatened to tear entire formations apart. Warriors felt the rhythm of the waves beneath their feet, timing their bow shots or spear thrusts to the rise and fall of the ship's deck. In such moments, the sea and the fighting men upon it became aligned in a single pulse of movement, force, and intention. Even after the Mongol threat subsided, Japan continued refining its naval traditions. Coastal lords, understanding that power flowed through the control of waterways, assembled fleets to protect domains, trade routes, and castle harbors. Sea clans emerged, warriors raised from childhood to read the tides, predict storms, and guide ships through narrow straits where rocks lurked beneath the surface like silent predators. In their minds, war at sea ceased to be a temporary adaptation. It became an extension of the samurai ideal, a realm where discipline, courage, and skill were tested by an element that punished every mistake. Thus, the maritime culture of Japan forged a new type of warrior, one who balanced the weight of armor with the rolling breath of the ocean, who understood that battles fought upon water demanded a sharper mind and a steadier spirit. And as centuries passed, this union between samurai and sea deepened, preparing the path for an even more demanding art, the ability to enter the water fully armed, to swim not as a desperate survivor, but as a trained fighter whose spirit did not falter even when the waves closed over his head. The moats surrounding Japan's great castles often lay still beneath the morning sun, their mirror-like surfaces reflecting the stone walls and wooden towers above. Yet beneath these calm waters, countless warriors trained their bodies to endure trials that many considered impossible. The art of swimming in armor, known as Katsugozen no Yogi, emerged as a discipline born not from curiosity, but from necessity. For in a land where rivers, marshes, and storm-swollen fields constantly merged into the battlefield, the ability to remain effective even when submerged became a hallmark of a true bushi. The samurai who stepped into these waters understood that once armor grew heavy with moisture, its weight could pull a man into silence within seconds, unless he had trained his muscles and breath to resist the pull of the depths. He watched how young warriors entered the moat, the cold water rising first to their waists, then to their chests, pressing against the layered plates of their cuirasses. The air filled with the metallic clatter of kusazuri, the skirt of armor that shifted with each slow step. Instructors, stern and patient, guided them through movements designed not for elegance, but for survival. The first command was simple: remain calm. Panic in water turned armor into a tomb. Discipline transformed it into a tool. Those who trained understood that metal did not make decisions, the mind did. With controlled breaths, the warriors leaned forward, letting the water lift them, forcing their limbs to adapt to a new balance where every motion required precision. Martial arts schools soon formalized these practices. The traditions of Kobo Ryu and Sufu Ryu cultivated techniques that allowed samurai to maneuver while carrying full armor, bows, swords, even clan flags. Yamanouchi Ryu trained warriors to handle firearms from water, a skill considered nearly impossible due to the fragility of matchlock mechanisms. Exercises became more complex: swimming across castle moats under simulated enemy fire, diving to retrieve weighted objects symbolizing fallen comrades, moving silently along riverbanks using reeds as breathing tubes. Each practice session tested endurance, courage, and the quiet authority of self-control that the samurai valued above all else. The training extended beyond strengthening muscles. Warriors learned how water changed the flow of motion, how the drag of soaked garments slowed sword draws, how currents tugged at armored sleeves, how the angle of a bowshot shifted when chest deep in water. Even shooting arrows became an art of listening to the rhythm of the current. A bowstring wet with spray lost tension, and the archer had to adjust stance and timing, often firing at the moment the water lifted him slightly, granting a fleeting fraction of steadiness. Instructors demanded absolute concentration, reminding their students that water punished carelessness faster than any enemy blade. As seasons passed, the samurai who trained in these waters developed an unusual relationship with the element. The cold shock of immersion no longer startled them. Instead, it sharpened their senses, clearing their thoughts and strengthening their resolve. They began to perceive the water not as a threat, but as a partner that taught patience and adaptability. Moments spent floating in armor, hearing only the muted splash of their own movements, became a form of meditation that bound physical skill with inner stillness. In such silence, a warrior confronted his fears directly, learning to remain unshaken even when the abyss pressed against his ribs. Stories of those who mastered swimming in armor spread across provinces. Warriors who crossed rivers at night without a sound, who engaged enemies waist-deep in mud-filled plains, who used the water to conceal their approach or retreat. These tales were not exaggerations, but reflections of a discipline passed from teacher to student with unbroken precision. And as these techniques matured, a new era of water martial arts rose across Japan, each school shaped by its own landscape and philosophy, promising to refine this demanding craft even further. Across the landscapes of Japan, where mountain streams coiled through narrow valleys and vast lakes mirrored the solemn sky, unique schools of water martial arts emerged, each shaped by the terrain that surrounded it. The samurai who traveled between provinces quickly noticed that the techniques taught in one region differed remarkably from those of another, for every body of water demanded its own form of discipline. The art of swimming in armor was no longer a simple survival skill. It became an intricate system of practices woven into rituals, philosophy, and local traditions. Warriors who stepped into these waters entered not merely training grounds, but living classrooms, where rivers, lakes, and tides served as relentless instructors. He observed how students of Mukai-ryu approached the rushing mountain rivers of their homeland, stepping cautiously yet confidently into currents that pulled at their armor with a force capable of unbalancing even seasoned fighters. These warriors learned to cross torrents that roared between jagged rocks, their movements anchored by deep stances and controlled breathing. The river's surge pressed against their legs, demanding absolute awareness of balance. Every shift in the current required an adjustment of posture. Mukai-ryu taught that strength alone was useless here. Only the ability to read the movement of the water, its speed, its rhythm, its hidden pulls, allowed a warrior to pass through unscathed. In these moments, river and fighter became intertwined, engaged in a silent dialogue of force and resolve. Far from these steep valleys, the Sasanuma-Ryu practitioners trained on still lakes that stretched toward distant villages, their surfaces so calm that even a falling leaf left an impression. Yet these tranquil waters concealed their own challenges. Warriors were taught to glide across the lake without sending ripples outward, a task requiring extraordinary control of breath and muscle. They practiced techniques of silent swimming, submerging with only the top of the helmet visible above the surface, moving like shadows across the mirror-like expanse. The stillness demanded a subtler kind of strength, the ability to maintain long, slow strokes without disturbing the water's fragile calm. For Sasanuma-Ryu, mastery meant becoming invisible, merging with the lake until even watchful eyes on shore mistook the approaching warrior for drifting debris. On the coasts, where the horizon dissolved into the roar of the Pacific, the Konkai-Ryu school taught survival in the open sea. Training here was relentless. Waves crashed against armored chests with the weight of stone, forcing warriors to brace themselves against the swells or risk being dragged beneath. Students learned to float using air trapped in their garments, to rest in rhythm with the tide, and to navigate back toward land even when fog swallowed every landmark. The ocean tested not only the body, but the spirit, reminding every warrior that patience was as crucial as strength. Konkai-Ryu students were known to spend hours drifting in rough waters, their minds steady even as the wind tugged at their helmets and salt spray numbed their limbs. Hidden among forests and mountain villages, unmarked by banners or official recognition, existed the secret schools of ninja who developed underwater movement techniques that bordered on the incredible. These practitioners learned to slip beneath the surface, pushing forward with the quiet grace of fish, using reeds as breathing tubes, or carrying small air bladders crafted from animal skins. They trained to move horizontally along riverbeds, avoiding detection even when enemy patrols passed just above their submerged forms. Some exercises required them to remain completely still while holding a paper fan above the water, allowing no tremor to betray their presence. These drills sharpened awareness until the slightest ripple became as revealing as a shout. Every school carried its own rituals, often passed down through generations with reverence. Small ceremonies preceded training sessions, the offering of water scooped with both hands to the spirits of the river, or the silent moment of kneeling at the edge of a lake before entering. Warriors believed that these waters were alive, that they possessed memory, and that the element responded to the intent of the one who entered it. Thus, water martial arts grew not only as physical disciplines, but as meditative traditions. In the heart of their training, a warrior discovered that stillness did not oppose motion, but complemented it, revealing a deeper truth. Mastery over water began with mastery over oneself. And as the influence of these schools spread, drawing admiration and curiosity from lords and commoners alike, a new chapter unfolded in the samurai's relationship with water, one where skill met celebration, and training transformed into ritualized contests that tested the limits of endurance and honor.
When the long wars of the Sengoku era gave way to the relative peace of Tokugawa rule, the art of swimming in armor shifted from the harsh urgency of battlefield necessity to the polished refinement of cultural tradition. Yet its essence did not weaken. Instead, it rose to new heights as Daimyo courts began hosting water competitions, where warriors from different provinces displayed the techniques inherited from their schools. Across castle towns, word spread quickly whenever such a tournament approached, drawing crowds to riversides, lake shores, and the stone moats that encircled the ruling family's fortresses. In these gatherings, the air carried a sense of anticipation not unlike that of a battlefield. Quiet at first, yet charged with a solemn intensity that deepened as participants stepped toward the water. He stood among the retainers, observing as rows of armored swimmers took their positions at the edge of a broad moat. The surface glimmered beneath the summer sun, broken only by the slow rise of steam. Judges in formal robes waited on raised platforms, their expressions calm, their attention fixed on every detail. Warriors tightened helmet straps, adjusted chest plates, and breathed deeply in preparation. These competitions were not games. They were tests of discipline, endurance, and technical mastery performed before the eyes of lords who valued composure as much as victory. A single misstep could bring embarrassment to an entire clan. During one legendary tournament held in Edo, the 25 finest swimmers in the realm were summoned to perform before Shogun Tokugawa Ieyasu. The event lasted 3 days, a slow unfolding of strength and will in which participants demonstrated their ability to cross moats while carrying heavy flags, shoot arrows with soaked bowstrings, and retrieve weighted objects from depths where sunlight barely reached. The silence that followed each dive was profound, broken only when a warrior resurfaced with the object clutched to his chest, armor dripping as he drew breath with steady composure. The court chroniclers recorded each movement with precision, noting the grace or struggle of every participant. Competitions often highlighted the refined techniques of specific schools. Practitioners of Sasanuma-ryu glided across the water with such stillness that spectators struggled to see where their silhouettes ended and the lake's reflection began. Warriors of Mukai-ryu crossed rushing streams created artificially through temporary dams, demonstrating their command of powerful currents. Meanwhile, Kankai-ryu swimmers, hardened by sea training, impressed the audience by floating in armor for extended periods, adjusting their breathing in a rhythm that defied exhaustion. Even ninja practitioners appeared occasionally, though never officially announced. Their underwater movements so subtle that many spectators questioned whether they had seen anything at all or merely imagined shadows beneath the surface. These events gradually became part of seasonal festivals, merging martial discipline with ritual celebration. Children gathered at the shores to imitate swimmers with wooden helmets, while elders recounted stories of famous contestants who had transformed their clan's reputations by excelling in the water. For many, these competitions served as living reminders that the spirit of the samurai did not fade in peaceful times. Instead, it adapted, continuing to sharpen itself through structured tradition. What once was harsh training beneath rain and river spray evolved into a disciplined art form, still demanding unwavering focus and respect for the element that tested every movement. As the Meiji era dawned and Japan opened its doors to the world, the role of swimming shifted once again. Military academies continued to incorporate water training, yet it now blended with Western swimming techniques. Youth schools and naval institutions preserved ancient methods within new frameworks, ensuring that the philosophy behind the practice endured even as its outward form changed. The competition survived, though transformed into sporting events that emphasized endurance, teamwork, and ritual respect for water. Even playful games on summer rivers, floating contests, skill demonstrations with bamboo poles, synchronized movements carried echoes of old traditions, reminding the younger generations that what seemed like leisure once shaped the survival of warriors. And in these evolving rituals, one truth remained constant. Each event, from the solemn court demonstrations to the humble village gatherings, preserved the essence of the samurai's bond with water. This bond, tested through centuries of war and refined through centuries of peace, prepared the way for the final legacy of this ancient art.
As the centuries unfolded and the sound of clashing steel faded into memory, the art of swimming in armor remained woven into Japan's cultural tapestry, surviving not through battlefield necessity, but through the persistence of those who understood its deeper meaning. Across lakes, along riverbanks, and within the calm embrace of castle moats now overgrown with reeds, echoes of old trainings could still be sensed. Subtle vibrations in the water, faint ripples carrying stories of warriors who once trusted their lives to the element that awaited them with silent patience. In this transformed era, where modernity reshaped the landscape and ancient castles stood as monuments rather than fortresses, the practice evolved into a symbol rather than a tactic.
yet its core continued to hold profound significance. He often walked along the stone-lined canals of historic towns, observing how reflections shifted across their dark surfaces. Children played at the edges, sometimes mimicking the strokes of swimmers long gone, while teachers recounted tales of schools that taught warriors to breathe calmly beneath pressure and navigate currents with the same focus they brought to swordsmanship. The water no longer held the urgent danger of war, yet it remained a boundary between past and present, a fluent thread tying together generations of practitioners who found purpose in its embrace. Through these stories, one could feel the lingering presence of a discipline that had shaped countless warriors' spirits, forging their resilience through immersion in the cold depths. Modern martial arts schools, though far removed from the original battlefield demands, preserved fragments of ancient techniques. Demonstrations included slow, deliberate movements performed waist-deep in water, echoing the silent concentration of Sasu-numa Ryu, or the endurance-based floating of Kankai Ryu. These rituals were less about survival and more about honoring a lineage that taught warriors to face difficulty with unwavering calm. Even in contemporary swimming practices, the influence could be felt. The emphasis on breath control, the smooth transitions between positions, the awareness of how water altered balance and intention. What once was a military necessity had become a philosophical practice shared by athletes, martial artists, and spiritual seekers alike. In some regions, annual festivals continued to celebrate traditional water arts. Spectators gathered beneath red and white banners as participants performed techniques inherited from old schools, moving across rivers with controlled strokes, or diving to recover symbolic objects placed on the riverbed. Lanterns floated along the surface at dusk, their gentle glow illuminating scenes that seemed suspended between centuries. These events carried not only beauty, but also reverence, a recognition that the water beneath the lanterns had once risen in storms, swallowed armored warriors, and tested the resolve of entire fleets. Now it offered a quiet stage where memory flowed uninterrupted. The philosophical weight of the tradition deepened with time. Teachers spoke of water as a mirror, reflecting the warrior's spirit without distortion. They taught that water was soft, yet overwhelming, yielding, yet relentless, that it adapted to its container, yet carved mountains over centuries, that it accepted the fallen without judgment and carried the living forward with rhythm and purpose. Students who stepped into the water, whether in rivers, pools, or the shallow edges of the sea, felt the truth of these teachings directly. Immersion stripped away pride and pretension. Coldness awakened clarity. Movement revealed inner tension. Stillness revealed the heart. Thus, the legacy of swimming in armor endures, not as a relic of war, but as a testament to the unyielding balance between strength and surrender. The samurai, who once braved storms, currents, and the crushing pull of sodden armor, left behind more than techniques. They left a philosophy rooted in the belief that a warrior must remain steady in every element, unmoved by chaos, yet open to the lessons carried by wind and water. Modern Japan, shaped by centuries of change, still carries this legacy in its quiet rivers, its disciplined practices, its reverence for the unseen depths. And as the waters continued to flow, never still, never identical to the moment before, they whisper an enduring truth. A true warrior does not fear the deep. He dives not to escape the world, but to encounter himself within it, finding in the quiet beneath the surface a pathway to understanding that no storm, no battle, and no tide can ever erode.